The scary part isn't always what happens. Sometimes it's how normal everything feels before it does. Welcome in. Here we cover real stories from 4chan, told by people who ended up in places they never expected. This one starts calmly, but that calm doesn't last the way it should. Get comfortable, soften the lights, and don't forget the bell. Let's begin. The pediatric floor at 3 in the morning is not quiet. It just sounds different. The monitors still beep, the vents still push cold air through the ceiling, and somewhere down the hall a kid always cries in their sleep. But the hallways go long and empty. The overheads dim to that yellowy nighttime setting, and you get used to the sound of your own shoes on the vinyl. That's the part that lulls you. I'd been on nights at the hospital in Atlanta for about 2 years by November of 2021, 6 months of that in peds. I liked it, actually. Days were a mess. Nights, once meds were passed and the kids were down, you could breathe. You had your rounds, your charting, your coffee in the little break room with the busted microwave that only heated things in a circle around the edge. That night I was working the West Wing. 12 beds, 8 full. Nothing critical, just kids on the mend. Post-op tonsils, a little boy in for asthma, a girl who'd been in a car wreck with her mom and had a broken arm and stitches over her eyebrow. Her mom was in the recliner in the room, dead asleep. That was the sort of shift it was. Slow, boring, honestly. I did my first walkthrough at midnight. Second one at 2. Everything was fine. I remember I sat down at the desk after the 2 o'clock round and ate a granola bar and texted my sister about Thanksgiving because she was pushing me to drive up to Chattanooga and I didn't want to. Around 3, I got up to walk the hall again. Peds visiting hours cut off at 8. After 10, the whole floor badges in and out. Nobody rides that elevator up at 3 a.m. except staff. If a parent stays overnight, they're already in the room. That's the setup. You know it in your bones after a few months, and you stop even thinking about it. I turned the corner from the nurses' station into the long stretch of the West Wing, and I stopped walking. There was a man at the far end of the hallway. He was standing outside room 12, just standing there, not leaning, not looking at his phone, not doing the shifting foot thing people do when they're waiting for a nurse. His hands were down at his sides. He was facing the door. My first thought, honest to God, was that he was a dad. That's how the brain works. You see a grown man on a peds floor at night and you fill in the story before you finish seeing him. Somebody's father. Came up from the cafeteria. Couldn't sleep in the chair. But room 12 didn't have a parent staying over. I knew that because I'd been in there twice already. The kid in 12 was a 7-year-old named Micah, in for a bad reaction to a new seizure med. His mom worked 2 jobs and had gone home around 10. I'd promised her I'd keep an eye on him. I started walking toward the man. Not fast, just walking. The way you do when you're going to ask a polite question, and you're already 90% sure there's a normal answer. I got about halfway down the hall, and my hand went to my belt. I didn't decide to do it. My thumb just found the panic button on the little plastic clip they give you and rested there. I remember thinking, that's weird. Why am I doing that? He hasn't done anything. He heard me coming. He turned around slow. He was maybe 50, salt in his hair, glasses, a tan jacket over a button-down, khakis, clean shoes. The kind of man you'd see in line at a coffee shop and forget 2 seconds later. He smiled at me. Not a big smile, a polite one, small. Evening, he said. I said, hi, can I help you? I'm just checking, he said. That's what he said, word for word. I've turned it over enough times that I'm sure. Not, I'm checking on my kid, or I'm checking with a nurse, or I'm checking the room number. Just, I'm just checking. I asked him who he was there to see. He looked at the door of 12 for a second like he was thinking, and then he looked back at me and he said, the little one. Not a name, the little one. I asked to see his visitor pass. Everybody who comes on the floor after hours gets a paper sticker from the lobby desk, dated and timed and stuck on the chest. He didn't have one. He patted his jacket pocket like he was going to have one, and then he stopped patting and just looked at me. I must have left it downstairs, he said. How did you get up here? I said. He said, the elevator. I said, the elevator needs a badge after 10. He said, oh. And then he didn't say anything else. He just looked at me, still polite, still smiling in that small, closed way. I want to be clear about something. He was not menacing. He wasn't twitching. He wasn't sweating. He didn't smell like anything. He looked like somebody's uncle. If I'd passed him in the parking garage at shift change, I would not have looked twice. That was the part that made my stomach turn over. Because there's a version of this where a guy is obviously wrong, obviously wired, and you feel it and you react. This wasn't that. This was a man who looked like he belonged, standing in a place where I knew 100% he did not. I pressed the button on my belt. I didn't move. I didn't back up. I didn't make it a big thing. I kept my face flat and I said, "Okay, let's walk to the desk and we'll figure this out." He didn't argue. He said, "Sure." He put his hands in his jacket pockets and my whole body locked up for a second, but he just pulled them back out empty and let them hang. He was watching me the way you'd watch a dog you weren't sure about. Careful. Reading. I made him walk in front of me. He did. Slow, easy pace, like we were going to the vending machines. He didn't look back at 12. That, at the time, felt worse than if he had. The security guys came off the elevator maybe 40 seconds later. 2 of them. One I knew, a big guy from Decatur named Reggie. He took one look at the situation and put himself between me and the man in the tan jacket without making a show of it. The other one asked the man to come with them. He said, "Of course," in that same polite voice, and he went. I stood in the hallway for a second, and my legs did the thing where they feel like they're not quite yours. Then I went into room 12. Micah was asleep, on his back, one arm out from under the blanket, mouth open a little. The monitor was steady. The IV was steady. He hadn't moved. He didn't know anything had happened. I stood next to his bed for maybe a full minute, just watching him breathe, and then I fixed the blanket over his shoulder and left the room and closed the door quietly behind me. I finished the shift. You do. You chart. You pass off in the morning. You drive home in the dark with the radio off. I got home around 8, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a while before I went inside. The follow-up I got in pieces over the next 2 weeks, mostly from Reggie and a little from HR when they took my statement. The man had an ID on him. He'd worked at the same hospital about 5 years earlier, not on peds. He'd been in facilities, something to do with supply and equipment on a completely different floor. He'd been let go. I asked why, and nobody would tell me the details, but the way Reggie said, "let go," the second time, made it clear it wasn't for being late. His badge from back then had been deactivated the day he was fired. That's standard. They pulled the elevator logs and they never figured out for sure how he got up. Best guess was he tailed somebody through a stairwell door on a lower floor and worked his way up. There are a lot of doors in a hospital, and staff prop them open more than they should. In the interview, they asked him why he'd come to the hospital that night. He said he wasn't sure. They asked him why the peds floor. He said he wasn't sure. They asked him why room 12. He didn't answer. They asked him if he knew the child in room 12. He said no. They asked him what he was going to do. He said, "I was just checking." Same words. That was as far as they got with him. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't on anything. He knew where he was and what day it was. Micah went home 4 days later with a new medication schedule and a stuffed dinosaur from the gift shop that his mom bought him. He was fine. He is, as far as I know, still fine. I stayed on nights for another year. I still work in peds. Different hospital now, different city. I don't leave doors propped. I badge in even when someone's holding it open for me, and I make them badge in too. And I've had exactly one coworker call me rude about it, and I did not care. Sometimes, driving home, I think about the route I took that night. There's a shorter way to walk that hall. You cut through the linen alcove and come out closer to room 8. If I'd gone that way, I would have finished the round from the other end. I would have gotten to room 12 last, maybe a minute later, maybe 2. I don't know what he was going to do. Nobody does. He never said. He may not have known himself, and that's the part I can't put down. Not the man in the jacket, the blank space where his reason should have been. Micah's mom sent a card to the unit that Christmas. It had a picture of him on the front and a Santa hat. I kept it in my locker for a long time. The moment I knew something was wrong, I was in the copy room on the 3rd floor with a stack of subpoena returns in my hand, and my lieutenant was leaning against the doorframe asking me, again, if he could take a look at the financials before I went any deeper. That was the 3rd time in a week. I work economic crimes out of the Richmond Police Department, downtown building off Grace Street, small unit, 6 detectives when we're at full strength, which we almost never are. Most of what we do is boring. Check kiting, contractor fraud, elder scams where some 70-year-old in Chesterfield wires her retirement to a guy calling himself an FBI agent from a 202 area code. Slow work. Nobody notices us unless somebody local and well-off gets hit. The case that started it landed on my desk in early May of 2023. A construction supply company out in Henrico was flagging invoices that didn't match anything they'd ordered. Owner came in with a folder. Nice guy, 40s, called himself Danny. He'd hired a bookkeeper the year before who came recommended through his brother-in-law's church. 6 months in, she was gone, and about $90,000 was gone with her, moving out in pieces through fake vendor invoices and a credit card opened in the company's name that nobody had signed for. Standard fraud. Not my first, not my 100th. I started pulling the records. Bank statements from Truist, credit card statements, vendor list, the whole thing. And I started tracing where the money went. That part is tedious. You subpoena one account, you get names of the accounts it paid, you subpoena those, and you keep going until the trail either dies in cash withdrawals or leads to something you recognize. 2 of the vendor names Danny had been paying were Shell LLCs, registered to a guy I'll just call M, address in Short Pump, no filings, no website. But M had co-signed on a residential mortgage 2 years earlier with another name, and that name showed up on a hunting license, and the hunting license listed an emergency contact who shared a last name with somebody I recognized. That somebody was my lieutenant's wife's cousin. I sat with that for a while, long enough that my coffee went cold in the mug that says, "World's Okayest Aunt," that my niece gave me for Christmas. It was thin. 3 degrees of separation. The kind of thing that, in any other case, I'd have noted in the margin and moved on, because your job is to follow money, not gossip. But I hadn't told the lieutenant any of the names yet, not one. And that same afternoon, he walked over to my cubicle and asked if we could grab coffee downstairs. He's a big guy, mid-50s. Everybody likes him. He remembers your kids' names. When my dad had his stroke in 2021, he covered my caseload himself for 2 weeks. I want to be clear about that. I liked him. I still like him, in a way I'm trying not to think about too much. Downstairs, he bought me coffee from the cart in the lobby and asked how the Henrico case was going. I said fine, mostly paperwork at that point. He asked about the accounts, specifically, which banks, which vendors. He kept his voice friendly the whole time, but he asked about the vendors twice, in slightly different ways, like he was checking whether I'd give the same answer. I gave him nothing. Told him I was still waiting on returns. He nodded and told me not to burn myself out on it. "Send me the working file when you get a chance," he said. "I've got some time this week. I can help you build the timeline." Nobody had ever asked me for a working file before. That night I drove home and parked in front of my building on Monument Avenue and sat in the car with the engine off. It was raining, that soft May rain that doesn't really commit. I kept trying to construct a version where his interest was normal. He was a good supervisor. Good supervisors ask questions. Good supervisors offer help. That was reasonable. It was also true that in 14 years I had never seen him ask to build a timeline for anybody. Timelines are grunt work. Lieutenants don't do grunt work. The next morning I did something small. I made a copy of my working folder on a personal thumb drive and locked it in the glove compartment of my car. Then I went to work and behaved normally. I said good morning. I laughed at the joke somebody made about the vending machine eating another dollar. I sat at my desk. At around 10, he stopped by, asked if I'd sent the file. I said I was still cleaning it up, not ready for anybody else's eyes yet. Embarrassing. He smiled, said, "Take your time." Then he stood there, about 3 seconds longer than he needed to, before he walked away. And in those 3 seconds, he looked at my monitor. I had it locked. I'd started locking it when I got up to pee, which I had not done a week earlier. Over the next few days, it escalated in ways I don't think anybody else would have noticed. He walked past my desk more. He asked about M's name once, casually, framing it like he'd heard it from somebody in the unit. Nobody in the unit had heard that name from me. I hadn't written it in any shared system. It existed only on my personal notes and in the raw subpoena returns. He asked if I wanted to grab lunch, twice. Both times I said I had a thing. On a Thursday afternoon, he sent me a Teams message. "Hey, why don't you drop the Henrico stuff on my desk end of day? I'll take it home over the weekend and give you a fresh pair of eyes Monday." I read that message 5 or 6 times. People who haven't been in it assume it's dramatic. It isn't. It's a small, sour feeling at the back of your throat. No adrenaline. Just the slow rearranging of every friendly moment with this person over 4 years, one by one. I didn't reply right away. I took the elevator down and walked out onto Grace Street and stood under the awning of the sandwich place next door. The problem was, I had nothing. A chain of connections that wouldn't survive 5 minutes in a courtroom. A boss asking to see a case file, which bosses are technically allowed to do. If I went to anybody in my own chain of command, I'd be going to people who golfed with him. I went back upstairs, replied to the Teams message and said I appreciated it, but I wanted to finish my first pass before handing it off, because I didn't want him wasting a weekend on my mess. He wrote back, "Sounds good." Then, about an hour later, he wrote again, "Just want to make sure we don't step on anything. Let's talk Monday." We don't step on anything. I went home that night and wrote it up. Not the fraud case, the other thing. I wrote it as neutrally as I could. I did not use the word corruption. I did not use the word suspect. I laid out the case, the connection I'd found, the 3 degrees, the fact that the connection had never been communicated up my chain, and the specific interactions with my supervisor that had followed. Dates, times, wording of the team's messages, verbatim. I titled it, "Potential Conflict of Interest, Request for Review." Then I sat on it for a day, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't writing it out of paranoia or ego, or because I was tired. On Saturday, I read it again. It still read the same. Monday morning, I did not go to my desk first. I went to the 4th floor, to the office of the captain who runs internal affairs, and I asked his assistant if I could get 20 minutes on his calendar. Not urgent, just something I wanted to walk through in person. He saw me at 11. I was more scared sitting in his waiting area than I had been at any point in the case. There's a specific kind of fear that comes with being the person who says the sentence out loud. Once you say it, you can't unsay it. And the whole culture of the building is built around not saying it. He read the memo in front of me, didn't react much. He asked me 2 questions. First, had I discussed this with anybody else? I said no. Second, did I have the working file on a device that was not connected to the department network? I said yes, in my car. He asked me to go get it. By the end of that week, the Henrico case had been reassigned to a detective I didn't know well, out of the Chesterfield office. I got a short email telling me my supervisor was on administrative leave pending review, and that I was not to discuss it with anybody in the unit. I didn't. People asked. I said I didn't know, which was mostly true. The review took a little over 2 months. What I heard later, through the standard channels everybody pretends don't exist, was that they found an indirect financial link between him and one of the shell entities. Not enough for a charge, enough for a problem. He was pulled off the Henrico matter, and a few weeks after that he was moved to a different division. Property, I think. I stopped tracking. I still work economic crimes. New lieutenant. Out of Norfolk originally. Quieter than the last one. Doesn't remember anybody's kids yet. The unit is the same. The coffee is the same. Danny got some of his money back. Not all of it. The hardest thing I have ever written on this job was not a warrant or a testimony. It was 4 pages, single-spaced, about a man who bought me coffee. The email hit the tip line at 11:47 on a Tuesday, and the subject line was just 3 letters, F Why I? I was on the desk alone, more or less. Copy editor 2 rows over, a stringer in the corner writing up a house fire in Dorchester, someone from sports arguing on the phone about a Bruins recap. The heat in the building was doing that thing where the radiators tick like a slow watch. I remember the taste of the second coffee, which was already the wrong side of hot. We got tip line emails all night. Most of it was garbage. Somebody's neighbor was in the CIA. Somebody's landlord was laundering money through a laundromat in Lynn. You skim, you flag the real ones, you kill the rest. This one had 2 PDFs and a body of about 6 lines. The body said the sender was a former contractor for a mid-sized logistics company out near Route 128, and the attached documents proved procurement fraud on state contracts. It was written like the ones that actually pan out. Not too much emotion, no caps, no conspiracy vocabulary. The sender was a Proton mail address, which is standard for that kind of thing. I opened the first PDF. It wasn't procurement records. It wasn't invoices. It was a photograph on the first page and a table of information on the second. The photograph was of Marisol. Marisol runs our City Hall beat. She's been at the paper longer than most of the furniture. In the photo, she was walking her dog on Com Ave, morning light, wearing the green coat I'd seen her wear 50 times. The angle was low and across the street, not a phone camera, not a snapshot. The composition was steady in a way that meant the person taking it knew how to take pictures without being seen. The table on page 2 listed her address, not the street, the unit number. It listed the make and year of her car and the last 4 of her plate. It listed the gym she went to on Beacon Street and the 2 mornings a week she went there. It listed her daughter's school, not the district, the school. I closed the file. I sat there for what a person watching me might have called a while. My hand was on the mouse and it wasn't moving. I could hear the sports guy laugh at something on his call. I opened the second PDF. It was the same structure, and it was Devin. He covers state politics. His page had a picture of him from behind, coming out of the parking garage on Congress Street, where a lot of us park because the paper subsidizes the monthly. The picture was taken from inside a car. You could tell because the top of a dashboard cut across the bottom of the frame. His information was on the second page, where he lived, that his mother, who I knew was sick, was in a rehab facility off Route 9 in Framingham, the name of the facility, the visiting hours he tended to use. There were 6 of these. I scrolled all the way through before I let myself think. Marisol, Devon, Priya from Investigations, Kevin from Investigations, our health reporter, whose byline I won't say because she's still on that beat, and Tomas, who's a photographer and doesn't even write. At the bottom of the last page, there was one line, in the same clean sans serif as the tables. This is not what you'll print. This is what we know about you. I read that line 3 times to make sure I hadn't put it there myself. Then I did something small that I think about a lot now. I stood up and I looked around the newsroom. The sports guy was still on the phone, feet up. The copy editor was highlighting something on her screen. The stringer was gone, coat off his chair still, fluorescent light on everything. The window behind me looks out onto Morrissey Boulevard and the parking lot, and I turned my back on it, and I didn't like doing that, so I moved to a different desk. I called Ray. Ray is the editor-in-chief. He lives in Milton. It was almost midnight, and I don't think I've ever called Ray at home in the 4 years I've worked under him. He picked up on the 3rd ring, in the voice of a man who had been asleep for maybe 20 minutes. "It's the desk," I said. "You need to come in." "Now?" "Yes." He didn't ask why. He said, 40 minutes, and hung up. I sat at the second desk, and I watched the tip line inbox in case another one came in. Nothing came in. The sender didn't send again that night. I read the first PDF a second time, slower, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't inventing the parts that scared me. I wasn't inventing anything. The unit number was Marisol's unit number. I know because I helped her carry a printer up there in October when her elevator was out. Ray got in at 12:31. He'd put on a dress shirt but no tie, and the collar was crooked. He stood behind me while I clicked through the pages, and I heard him breathing through his nose in a way that wasn't normal breathing. When we got to Tomas, he said, quietly, "Jesus Christ." That was the only thing he said until we were done. Then he sat down at my desk and he told me to make him a coffee. I made him a coffee. When I came back, he was on the phone with the paper's lawyer. The lawyer was on speaker, and I heard her say the word bureau, and I heard her say tonight, and I heard her say, "Do not forward that email to anyone else in this building." The FBI came in through the back entrance at 1:50. 2 agents, one of them a woman with a laptop bag, both of them polite in the way that means they've done this specific thing before. They took our machine. They took the email off the server. They asked me what I had touched, and I told them, honestly, that I had opened both attachments and read them, and that I had shown them to Ray. They wrote that down without looking up. The woman asked me if anything about the email seemed familiar, if the phrasing reminded me of anyone. I said, no. I said the body of the email was written like a normal tip, which was the part that had spooked me the most, because it meant whoever wrote it had probably read a lot of our tip emails and knew what we responded to. She said, "That's a good observation." She didn't say anything else about it. Ray called Marisol from the conference room around 2. I could see him through the glass. He kept his face very steady. Then he called Devin, then Priya. He got to Tomas last because Tomas doesn't answer his phone after 10, and Ray had to text him first. The last one I watched was Priya. She's the one who reacted the way I think I would have. She stood up from wherever she was, on the other end of the line, and started walking, because I saw Ray's face follow the pace of somebody moving. By 4 in the morning, there were security people in the lobby who had not been there when I came in that afternoon. By the end of the week, the paper had put a hold on any photos of staff on the website, changed the parking arrangement, and hired an outside firm to sweep the building for whatever it is those firms sweep buildings for. 2 of the reporters in the packet moved out of their apartments inside a month. I know because I helped Devin carry a mattress down 3 flights on a Sunday. The FBI didn't tell us anything. That's not a complaint, that's just what they do. They took what we had, they interviewed each of the 6, they interviewed me twice, and after that we heard nothing. The Proton Mail account was dead by morning. The metadata on the PDFs had been stripped clean. The photographs had been taken with more than one camera over what looked like more than 1 month. That's what the woman with the laptop bag told me on the second interview, and only because I asked. 2 weeks later, a friend of mine at a paper in Philadelphia called me on a Saturday. He said, "This is going to sound insane." I already knew what he was going to say. Their tip line had gotten an email. 2 PDFs, 6 people. A line at the bottom in clean sans serif. The same week, a newsroom in Atlanta got theirs, and one in Denver, all inside about 9 days of each other. I heard about Denver from Ray, who heard about it from someone at the bureau who was not supposed to be telling him. Different reporters, different beats. Same structure. Same last line, word for word. Nobody was ever charged. Nobody was ever named. No one, as far as I know, has gotten a 7th packet. I still work nights sometimes. The tip line still fills up with garbage. Somebody's landlord is still laundering money through a laundromat in Lynn. When a new email comes in with 2 attachments and a short, polite body, I open them at a desk that doesn't face the window. That's all we have for today, everyone. Write your reaction below and subscribe if you want more unsettling stories from 4chan. Sometimes a post doesn't need to explain everything to feel real. It just leaves enough space for your mind to fill in the worst parts. And honestly, that can be worse than the story itself. Stay aware, and I'll see you next time.